I pulled into my driveway after the most successful real estate closing of my career, still wearing my best Navy suit and feeling proud of the commission I'd just earned. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my front yard, but something felt wrong immediately. Three figures stood near my porch, and the glint of metal in their hands made my blood run cold. My mother Dorothy clutched a crowbar like her life depended on it, while my father Frank gripped a sledgehammer with white knuckles. My sister Madison sobbed hysterically, waving crumpled foreclosure papers in the air. The rage in my mother's eyes burned hotter than anything I'd ever witnessed. She screamed that I was a selfish monster who had destroyed our family forever, while Frank raised his crowbar toward my front window with deadly intent. But they had no idea what I'd discovered just 3 days ago. I stepped out of my pickup truck slowly, my dress shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. The weight of the day's success felt heavy in my chest as I faced the three people who had once been my entire world. Dorothy looked like she'd aged a decade since Christmas, her usually perfectly styled gray hair hanging limp around her shoulders. Deep circles shadowed her eyes, and her floral dress hung loose on her shrinking frame. Frank stood silent beside her, his weathered construction worker's hands trembling slightly as he gripped the sledgehammer. At 62, he'd always been my hero, but now he looked defeated and desperate. Madison appeared almost unrecognizable from the polished real estate agent I'd grown up admiring. Her blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, her designer clothes wrinkled and stained. At 35, she'd always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Now she looked haunted, her green eyes darting nervously between me and the street, as if expecting someone dangerous to appear at any moment. "Luke, thank God you're here," Dorothy said, her voice cracking with emotion. "We need to talk about Madison's situation. The people she owes money to aren't going to wait much longer." I loosened my tie, feeling the tension in my shoulders as I processed the scene before me. 6 months ago, Madison had approached our parents with what she claimed was a small financial emergency. She'd gotten involved in some high-stakes poker games down in Atlantic City, she said. What started as a friendly game with coworkers had somehow spiraled into serious gambling with dangerous people. "Mom, we've been through this," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the crowbars pointed at my property. "I already helped Madison last year when she said she needed $15,000 for medical bills. Then I found out she'd lied about having cancer and used the money for gambling." Frank finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Son, this is different. These aren't just gambling debts anymore. The people Madison owes money to have made it clear what happens if we don't come up with $189,000 in the next 72 hours. The number hit me like a physical blow. $189,000. I'd worked construction with Frank for 3 summers during college, saving every penny to buy this house. I'd spent the last 8 years building my career in commercial real estate, finally reaching a point where I could afford the mortgage payments and still have money left over for savings." Madison stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Luke, I know I've made mistakes. I know you don't trust me anymore, and I understand why. But these people know where Mom and Dad live. They know where you work. They've already shown up at the house twice asking questions about the family's assets." Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "We've already mortgaged the house again to help Madison initially. We gave her $40,000 from our retirement fund. Frank cashed in his pension early and took the penalties. We've sold my mother's jewelry collection, the antique furniture, even Frank's classic truck." My chest tightened as I realized the full scope of their financial destruction. My parents had worked their entire lives to build security for their retirement. Frank had spent 38 years as a construction foreman, coming home covered in dust and cement every evening. Dorothy had managed the books for a small accounting firm for 27 years, never missing a day of work even when she was sick. "There has to be another way," I said, looking at the crowbars they still held. You can't seriously be planning to destroy my house to force me to sell it." Frank's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. "We've been in contact with a real estate investor named Tony Marconi. He's offered to buy your house for exactly $189,000. It's below market value, but he can close immediately and pay cash." The name Tony Marconi sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard whispers about him in real estate circles. He specialized in distressed sales, often appearing when families were in crisis, and offering quick cash for properties worth significantly more than his offers. "Dad, my house is worth at least $300,000. You're asking me to lose over $100,000 to cover Madison's gambling debts." Madison's sobs intensified. "Luke, I'm begging you. I've seen what these people do to families who don't pay. They don't just hurt the person who owes money. They hurt everyone connected to that person. Mom, Dad, even your neighbors could be in danger if I don't make this right." I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize over the years. Madison had always been gifted at presenting herself as the victim in every situation, but the terror in her eyes seemed genuine. Dorothy raised her crowbar again, her voice becoming stronger and more determined. "Luke, we've tried everything else. We've begged banks for loans. We've applied for second mortgages. We've asked every relative and friend for help. Your house is the only asset left that's worth enough to save Madison's life. And if I refuse," I asked. Frank stepped forward, his knuckles white around the sledgehammer handle. "Then we'll make sure there's nothing left of this place worth protecting. If you won't sell it to save your sister, then maybe insurance money will have to be enough." The threat hung in the air between us like a poison cloud. These were my parents, people who had taught me right from wrong, who had sacrificed everything to give Madison and me opportunities they'd never had. Now they stood in my driveway prepared to commit crimes to enable my sister's destructive behavior. But what they didn't know was that I'd been investigating Madison's claims for weeks. I'd driven to Atlantic City and spoken with casino security. I'd talked to dealers who remembered her. I'd even tracked down Derek Morrison, Madison's ex-boyfriend, who'd told me things about my sister that had shattered my understanding of who she really was. The most shocking revelation came when Derek explained that Madison wasn't just a gambling addict. She'd been laundering money for criminal organizations using poker games as a cover for moving dirty cash. The $189,000 didn't represent money she'd lost gambling. It represented money she'd stolen. As I watched my parents prepare to destroy my home to save their daughter, I realized they had no idea they were being manipulated by someone far more dangerous than a gambling addict. Madison wasn't the victim in this story, she was the predator, and our family was her prey. But the most disturbing discovery of all was that Tony Marconi wasn't just a predatory real estate investor. He was connected to the same criminal network Madison had stolen from. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to acquire my property while eliminating Madison as a witness to her own crimes. The first window exploded in a shower of glass as Frank swung his sledgehammer with the desperation of a man who believed he was saving his daughter's life. The sound echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot, and I saw curtains twitch in nearby windows as neighbors realized something serious was happening. "Stop!" I shouted, but Dorothy had already raised her crowbar and brought it down on my front porch railing, splintering the wood I'd spent 3 weekends painting last summer. The impact sent vibrations through the entire structure, and Madison flinched as if the sound physically hurt her. "We don't want to do this." "Luke," Dorothy gasped, raising the crowbar again. "But Madison's life is worth more than your property values." I backed toward my truck as Frank moved to the next window, his face twisted with anguish. In 39 years of life, I'd never seen my father destroy anything valuable. He'd built barns, repaired broken furniture, and restored classic cars with infinite patience. Watching him deliberately demolish my home felt like witnessing the end of everything I thought I knew about my family. "Please just listen to me for 5 minutes." I said, but my words were drowned out by the crash of another window breaking. Madison stood frozen in the center of my front yard, tears streaming down her cheeks. But her eyes held something I'd started to recognize over the past few months. It wasn't fear or remorse. It was calculation. My phone buzzed with text messages as neighbors called 911. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her front porch with her cell phone clearly recording everything. The Johnsons from across the street had come outside with their teenage son, all of them staring in shock as my family destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property. As Frank moved toward my truck with the sledgehammer, I found myself remembering the conversation I'd had with Derek Morrison 3 weeks ago. Derek had been Madison's boyfriend for 2 years, right up until she'd suddenly broken up with him 6 months ago. He'd called me out of the blue saying he needed to tell someone in Madison's family the truth about what she'd been doing. Derek had worked security at one of the Atlantic City casinos, and he'd first noticed Madison because she came in regularly, but her gambling patterns were unusual. Most addicts show clear signs of emotional distress, erratic betting, and increasing desperation as they lose money. Madison displayed none of these behaviors. Instead, she seemed to follow specific scripts, making predetermined bets and maintaining careful records of her activities. What Derek discovered was that Madison would arrive at the casino with large amounts of cash claimed to lose it in poker games, then withdraw different money from accounts that couldn't be traced back to the original source. She was essentially cleaning dirty money for criminal organizations, taking a commission for each transaction while making it appear that legitimate gambling losses had occurred. The $189,000 Madison claimed she owed to dangerous people was actually money she'd kept instead of returning to her criminal employers. She'd been skimming from the money laundering operation, believing she could hide the theft by manipulating our family into covering her debts. But the most disturbing part of Derek's story was what happened when he'd confronted Madison about her activities. She'd cried and claimed she was being forced to launder money against her will. She'd begged him not to turn her in, promising she would find a way to get out of the criminal organization safely. Derek had believed her and agreed to keep her secret right up until he'd realized she was using him to gather information about casino security procedures. Madison hadn't been a victim of criminal manipulation. She'd been an active participant who'd gotten greedy and stolen from her criminal partners. Now she was using our family's love and loyalty to cover her theft, while positioning herself as the innocent victim of circumstances beyond her control. Frank's sledgehammer connected with my truck's windshield, sending spiderweb cracks across the glass. The sound brought me back to the present moment where my parents were destroying my property based on lies Madison had told them. "Dad, stop," I said, stepping between him and the truck. "Madison isn't telling you the truth about what happened in Atlantic City. Don't you dare blame your sister for this," Dorothy snapped, raising her crowbar toward my truck's headlights. "She made mistakes, but she's trying to fix them. You're the one who's abandoning family when we need you most." Madison's sobs intensified, but I noticed she was watching my reactions carefully, as if gauging whether her performance was convincing enough. The manipulation was subtle, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer every second. Frank and Dorothy exchanged panicked glances, realizing they were about to face legal consequences for their actions. Madison's eyes darted toward the street, and for a moment her mask of helpless desperation slipped, revealing something much colder underneath. "We need to get this sorted out before the police arrive," Madison said, her voice suddenly steadier than it had been all afternoon. "Luke, if you just agree to work with Tony Marconi, we can call off the property damage and tell the officers this was a misunderstanding." The change in her tone was subtle but significant. The desperate sobbing victim had been replaced by someone who was clearly thinking strategically about legal consequences and exit strategies. My phone rang and I saw my attorney's name on the screen. Benjamin Torres had been handling my real estate transactions for 3 years, but recently I'd asked him to investigate something much more serious than property contracts. Ben had spent the last 2 weeks researching Tony Marconi's business practices and the legal documents Madison had been showing our parents. "I need to take this call," I said, stepping away from my family as Dorothy continued destroying my porch furniture. "Luke, thank God," Ben's voice was urgent. "I've been trying to reach you for the last hour. We have a serious problem with the Marconi situation. This isn't just about property acquisition. Marconi has filed fraudulent liens against your house, claiming you owe money from Madison's debts. The liens are legally baseless, but they'll tie up your property in court for months, while he pursues acquisition through legal manipulation." My stomach dropped as I realized the full scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't a desperate family trying to save Madison from gambling debts. This was a carefully orchestrated criminal operation designed to steal my house while destroying my family in the process. "Ben, there's something else you need to know," I said, watching as police cars turned onto my street. "I think Madison is working with Marconi. This whole crisis might be manufactured to force the property sale. That would explain the timeline inconsistencies I found in her gambling debt documentation," Ben said. "Luke, whatever you do, don't agree to any property transfers until we can get federal authorities involved. This goes way beyond family disputes or gambling debts." As the police cars pulled into my driveway, I realized my family wasn't just being manipulated by Madison. We were all pawns in a criminal conspiracy that was much larger and more dangerous than any of us had understood. But what none of them knew was that 3 days ago, I'd made a decision that was about to change everything. Officer Ryan Sullivan stepped out of the first patrol car, his hand resting casually on his radio as he surveyed the scene of destruction. His partner, Officer Patricia Wells, approached from the passenger side, her notepad already open, as she documented the broken windows and scattered glass covering my front porch. "Evening, folks." Officer Sullivan said, his voice professionally calm despite the obvious property damage. "We received multiple calls about a domestic disturbance and vandalism in progress. Can someone explain what's happening here?" Frank lowered his sledgehammer, his face flushing with embarrassment, as he realized how the situation must look to law enforcement. Dorothy clutched her crowbar defensively, her eyes darting between the officers and Madison, who had resumed her sobbing performance with renewed intensity. "Officers, this is a family matter," Dorothy said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. "We're trying to save our daughter's life, and Luke is being selfish and unreasonable." Officer Wells approached the broken windows, taking photographs with her phone while making notes about the extent of the damage. "Ma'am, regardless of family disputes, destruction of property is a criminal matter. Mr. Patterson, I assume this is your residence?" "Yes, officer," I replied, pulling out my identification. "These are my parents, Dorothy and Frank Patterson, and my sister Madison Webb. They came here demanding that I sell my house to cover Madison's gambling debts, and when I refused, they started destroying my property." Madison stepped forward, her mascara streaked down her cheeks in perfectly calculated streams. "Officer, you don't understand. I owe money to very dangerous people. If my family doesn't help me pay these debts, people are going to get hurt. I was just trying to find a way to protect everyone." Officer Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his posture shift slightly as he processed Madison's words. "Ma'am, are you saying you're being threatened by individuals regarding unpaid debts?" "That's exactly what she's saying," Frank interjected, setting down his sledgehammer and stepping protectively closer to Madison. "Our daughter got involved with the wrong crowd in Atlantic City. Now they want $189,000, or they're going to hurt our whole family." Officer Wells looked up from her documentation. "Mr. Patterson, have you or your family members received direct threats from these individuals? Have you filed police reports about extortion or intimidation?" A black Mercedes pulled up behind the police cars, and Benjamin Torres stepped out wearing an expensive suit and carrying a thick briefcase. Ben had been my lawyer for 3 years, but today he looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. His usually relaxed demeanor was replaced by intense focus as he approached our group. "Officers, I'm Benjamin Torres, Mr. Luke Patterson's attorney," he said, handing business cards to both police officers. "I've been investigating the circumstances surrounding this family dispute, and I believe we're dealing with something much more serious than a gambling debt collection issue." Officer Sullivan studied Ben's card carefully. "Mr. Torres, what kind of investigation have you been conducting?" Ben opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Officers, I've spent the last 2 weeks researching the claims Ms. Webb has made about her gambling activities in Atlantic City. What I've discovered suggests she hasn't been entirely truthful with her family about the nature of her involvement with criminal organizations." Madison's face went pale, and for the first time all afternoon her tears stopped flowing. "I don't know what you think you found, but whatever it is, you're wrong. Ms. Webb." Ben said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in court, "I have bank records showing regular deposits into your accounts from shell companies connected to known money laundering operations. These deposits occurred over an 18-month period and total more than $400,000. Dorothy gasped and Frank staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. "Madison, what is he talking about?" Ben continued pulling additional documents from his folder. "I also have witness statements from casino employees who confirmed that Ms. Webb's gambling patterns were inconsistent with typical addictive behavior. Instead of showing signs of emotional distress and erratic betting, she followed predetermined scripts and maintained detailed records of her transactions." Officer Wells stepped closer to examine the documents Ben was presenting. "Mr. Torres, are you suggesting Ms. Webb was involved in money laundering activities?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Officer Wells," Ben replied. "Madison Webb wasn't a victim of gambling addiction. She was working as a money launderer for criminal organizations using poker games as a cover for cleaning dirty money. The $189,000 she claims she owes represents money she stole from her criminal employers, not money she lost gambling." Madison's carefully constructed victim persona crumbled completely as Ben's evidence mounted against her. The desperate, sobbing daughter was replaced by someone who was clearly calculating her legal options and considering escape routes. Furthermore, Ben continued, the real estate investor Tony Marconi, who offered to buy Luke's house for exactly the amount of Madison's supposed debt, isn't just a predatory investor. He's connected to the same criminal network Madison was laundering money for. This entire family crisis has been manufactured to force Luke to sell his property to criminals while eliminating Madison as a witness to money laundering activities. Frank sank down onto my front steps, his head in his hands. "Madison, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me we haven't destroyed our relationship with Luke and committed crimes to help you steal money." Dorothy stood frozen, the crowbar still clutched in her hands as she processed the magnitude of Madison's deception. "You let us mortgage our house. You let us spend our retirement savings. You watched us destroy Luke's property knowing we were being manipulated." Madison's mask finally slipped, completely revealing the cold calculation that had been driving her actions all along. "You all chose to help me without asking questions. I never forced any of you to do anything." Officer Sullivan stepped forward, his hand now resting on his handcuffs. "Ms. Webb, based on the evidence Mr. Torres has presented, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning regarding money laundering and fraud charges." But before Officer Sullivan could proceed with Madison's arrest, 2 black SUVs pulled up at the end of my street and several individuals in dark suits began walking toward my house. Ben's face went pale as he recognized what was happening. "Officers," Ben said urgently, "I believe we're about to have federal law enforcement involvement in this situation. This case may be much larger than any of us realized." As the suited figures approached, I realized that Madison's money laundering activities had attracted the attention of agencies much more powerful than local police. But what none of them knew was that my decision to sell my house 3 days earlier had created complications that could endanger my entire family. The lead figure reached our group and pulled out federal identification. "Good evening, everyone." I'm Agent Sarah Kim with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with all of you about an ongoing federal investigation into organized crime activities in the Atlantic City area." Frank looked up from the steps, his face gray with shock. "Federal investigation?" Agent Kim's expression was serious but not unkind. "Mr. Patterson, your daughter Madison has been working with federal law enforcement for the past month as part of an undercover operation to expose the criminal organization she became involved with. Everything you've witnessed today, including the family crisis and property destruction, has been part of an elaborate sting operation designed to gather evidence against Tony Marconi and his associates." The words hit me like a physical blow. Madison hadn't been manipulating our family to cover her theft. She'd been following federal instructions to help expose a criminal organization. Our parents' genuine suffering and my own anger had been used as tools in a law enforcement operation. But Agent Kim's next words made my blood run cold. "However, Mr. Luke Patterson's decision to sell his house 3 days ago, which he hasn't yet disclosed to anyone present, has created serious complications that may have endangered this entire operation and potentially put your family at risk." Agent Sarah Kim gestured for her team to secure the perimeter around my property as more federal vehicles arrived. The quiet suburban street where I'd lived peacefully for 5 years was rapidly transforming into the center of a major law enforcement operation. "Before we proceed," Agent Kim said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing complex criminal investigations, "I need everyone to understand that what you're about to learn is part of an active federal case involving organized crime money laundering and extortion. The safety of multiple families depends on how we handle the next few hours." Madison stepped forward, her entire demeanor transformed yet again. The sobbing victim and the cold manipulator were both gone, replaced by someone who appeared to be working closely with law enforcement professionals. "Luke, Mom, Dad." Madison said, her voice steady and clear for the first time all day. "I need you to know that everything I've put you through over the past 6 months has been necessary to protect you and to help federal agents build a case against a criminal organization that destroys families like ours." Dorothy dropped her crowbar, completely the metal clattering against the concrete driveway. "Madison, what are you saying? Are you telling us that our suffering, our financial ruin, Luke's anger, all of this was planned by federal agents?" Agent Kim nodded gravely. "Mrs. Patterson, your daughter was arrested 8 months ago for minor involvement in money laundering activities. Rather than face federal charges that could have resulted in 10 to 15 years in prison, Madison agreed to work undercover to help us expose the criminal organization that had recruited her." Frank stood up slowly from the steps, his legs shaking with a combination of exhaustion and shock. "So when Madison came to us 6 months ago claiming she needed help with gambling debts, that was all part of some federal operation." "The gambling debts were real," Madison explained. "But they were debts I'd been instructed to create as part of my undercover work. The federal agents needed to establish a believable scenario where my family would be desperate enough to consider selling property to Tony Marconi's organization." Ben Torres stepped forward, his legal training helping him process the implications faster than the rest of us. "Agent Kim, are you saying that Luke's parents were genuine victims of manipulation, but the manipulation was being orchestrated by federal law enforcement rather than by Madison independently?" "That's correct, Mr. Torres," Agent Kim replied. "Dorothy and Frank Patterson's financial losses, emotional trauma, and desperation were real and devastating. However, these sacrifices were necessary to create an authentic scenario that would convince Marconi's organization to proceed with their property acquisition scheme in a way that would provide evidence for federal prosecution." I felt rage building in my chest as I understood the full scope of how my family had been used. "Agent Kim, are you telling me that federal agents deliberately caused my parents to lose their retirement savings and nearly destroy their marriage to gather evidence against criminals?" "Mr. Patterson." Agent Kim said, her voice becoming more defensive. Organized crime families like Marconi's have been systematically destroying families across 3 states for over 5 years. Your parents' temporary financial losses were weighed against the potential to save dozens of other families from similar or worse fates. Madison looked directly at me. Her eyes filled with genuine remorse for the first time since I'd arrived home. Luke, I know how this sounds, but the federal agent showed me evidence of what Marconi's organization does to families who can't pay their manufactured debts. They don't just take property. They destroy people's lives completely, sometimes permanently. Officer Sullivan, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, stepped forward. Agent Kim, does this mean the property destruction we witnessed today was also part of your federal operation? The property destruction was supposed to occur, Agent Kim admitted, but Luke's parents' emotional responses were genuine. They truly believed they were saving Madison's life by forcing Luke to sell his house. Their pain and desperation convinced Marconi's associates that the family crisis was authentic. Dorothy began crying again, but these tears seemed different from her earlier desperation. Madison, do you understand what you've put us through? Your father cashed in his pension and took early withdrawal penalties? We mortgaged our house again. I sold my mother's jewelry, the only things I had left from her. Mom, Madison said, stepping closer to Dorothy, every dollar you spent will be returned to you with interest from federal asset forfeiture funds. The criminals we're targeting have stolen millions of dollars from families like ours. When they're convicted, their assets will be distributed to victims. Frank looked up at Agent Kim with exhausted confusion. Ma'am, I need to understand something. If Madison was working with federal agents all along, why didn't you just arrest Marconi instead of putting our family through months of hell? Agent Kim opened a tablet and showed Frank a series of photographs depicting various families in different cities. Mr. Patterson, Marconi's organization doesn't just target one family at a time. They run simultaneous operations in multiple locations, often manipulating 10 or 15 families simultaneously. We needed to document their entire network and gather evidence of their systematic approach to financial exploitation. Ben Torres reviewed some of the documents in his briefcase with new understanding. Agent Kim, the fraudulent liens Marconi filed against Luke's property weren't just harassment. They were evidence of how his organization manipulates legal systems to steal property from families in crisis. Exactly, Mr. Torres, Agent Kim confirmed. Marconi's associates file false legal claims against properties they're targeting, then use the resulting legal complications to pressure families into accepting below market value sales. Your client's refusal to cooperate and your legal challenges to the fraudulent liens provided us with additional evidence of their systematic approach. I looked around at the destruction covering my front yard and the federal agents securing my neighborhood, trying to process everything I'd learned. Agent Kim, you said my decision to sell my house 3 days ago created complications. What kind of complications? Agent Kim's expression became more serious. Mr. Patterson, Marconi's organization was counting on acquiring your property as part of their money laundering operation. When they discover the property has been sold to legitimate buyers, they'll realize their operation has been exposed and may take violent action against Madison and your family. Madison's face went pale again. Sarah, you said the operation was designed to protect my family. How does my cover being blown protect anyone? Madison, your cover isn't blown yet, Agent Kim replied. But it will be within hours once Marconi's associates realize they can't acquire Luke's property through their planned legal manipulation. They'll begin suspecting you've betrayed them, which puts your life in immediate danger. Frank stood up, his protective instincts overriding his confusion and exhaustion. Agent Kim, what do you need us to do to keep Madison safe? But before Agent Kim could respond, her radio crackled with urgent communication from other federal agents. Her expression shifted to alarm as she listened to the transmission. We have a problem, Agent Kim announced. Marconi's associates have just arrived at the house Luke sold 3 days ago. They're attempting to intimidate the new owners into selling the property immediately. But there's something about the new owners that we didn't expect. Ben Torres stepped closer to Agent Kim. What about the new owners? Agent Kim looked directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mr. Patterson, the family that bought your house 3 days ago isn't actually a family. They're undercover federal agents who've been specifically positioned to document Marconi's organization threatening innocent families. Your secret house sale wasn't secret at all. We've been monitoring all your communications and financial transactions for weeks. The revelation hit me like a truck. My decision to protect myself financially hadn't been my own decision at all. Federal agents had been manipulating me just as thoroughly as they'd been manipulating my parents in Madison. Agent Kim, I said, my voice tight with anger, exactly how many people in my life are federal agents, and how long have you been manipulating my family? But Agent Kim's radio crackled again before she could answer, and her expression shifted to urgent concern. We have federal agents in immediate danger at your former property, Mr. Patterson. Marconi's associates have arrived with weapons, and they're not just attempting to intimidate the new owners. They're threatening to harm their children unless the family sells the house within the hour. My mind reeled as Agent Kim's words sank in. The innocent family I thought I'd sold my house to were actually undercover federal agents, and now they were facing armed criminals because of a sting operation I'd unknowingly participated in. Agent Kim, I said, stepping closer to her as she coordinated with other federal teams through her radio. You're telling me that David and Carol Henderson, the people who bought my house, are actually FBI agents? David Mitchell and Carol Rodriguez are two of our most experienced undercover operatives. Agent Kim confirmed while monitoring multiple radio frequencies. They specialize in family infiltration operations, and their cover as a military veteran and nurse moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood was specifically designed to appear as attractive targets for Marconi's intimidation tactics. Ben Torres pulled me aside, his legal mind processing the implications faster than I could emotionally handle them. Luke, this means every aspect of your house sale was monitored and probably influenced by federal agents. The timing, the buyers, even your decision to sell was likely guided by their investigation. Madison approached us, her face etched with guilt and worry. Luke, I need you to understand that I never wanted you or our parents to be manipulated like this. When I first agreed to work with federal agents, they told me it would be a simple operation that would last a few weeks. I had no idea it would become this complex, or that our entire family would be used as unwilling participants. Dorothy and Frank stood together near the remains of my front porch, holding each other, as they tried to comprehend how completely their lives had been disrupted by forces beyond their understanding. The crowbar and sledgehammer lay forgotten on the ground symbols of how desperate people can be driven to actions they never thought possible. Agent Kim's radio buzzed with increasingly urgent communications from the team at my former house. Agent Mitchell is reporting that 4 armed individuals have surrounded the property. They're demanding that the Henderson family sign property, transfer documents immediately, and they've made explicit threats against the children. What children? I asked, feeling a new wave of horror wash over me. The undercover operation requires Agent Rodriguez to appear as a mother of 2 young children, Agent Kim explained. The children are also federal agents specially trained for family infiltration scenarios, but they're still minors and still at risk if this situation escalates to violence. Frank stepped forward, his protective instincts extending beyond just Madison to innocent children he'd never met. Agent Kim, these agents are in danger because of our family situation. What can we do to help them? Agent Kim studied her tablet, reviewing real-time surveillance footage from my former property. The problem is that Marconi's associates are becoming suspicious of why the Henderson family was able to purchase the house so quickly and why they seem unusually calm despite armed threats. Professional criminals develop instincts about when situations feel artificially constructed. Are you saying they suspect the Hendersons are law enforcement? Ben asked. Worse, Agent Kim replied grimly. We're intercepting radio communications suggesting they believe the entire neighborhood has been infiltrated by federal agents. They're considering eliminating all potential witnesses to their intimidation tactics. Madison grabbed Agent Kim's arm. Sarah, you have to get those agents and their children out of there immediately. I'll testify against Marconi's organization based on everything I've already witnessed. We don't need additional evidence if it means putting children at risk. Madison, your testimony alone isn't enough to dismantle their entire network, Agent Kim explained. We need documentation of their systematic approach to threatening families, their property acquisition methods, and their connections to money laundering operations across multiple states. Officer Sullivan, who had been coordinating with local law enforcement to secure my neighborhood, approached our group. Agent Kim, we have additional complications. Neighbors throughout this area are reporting suspicious vehicles and individuals conducting surveillance on their properties. It appears Marconi's organization believes this entire community is part of your federal operation. The scope of the danger was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined. My decision to sell my house, to protect my own interests, had inadvertently put an entire neighborhood at risk. Luke, Dorothy said, approaching me with tears streaming down her face. I need you to forgive us for what we've done to your property. I know we can't undo the damage or take back the things we said, but we need to work together to help those agents and their children. Mom, I replied, putting my arm around her shoulders. We've all been manipulated by people who are much better at this than we are. The important thing now is making sure nobody gets hurt because of our family's situation. Agent Kim received another urgent communication through her earpiece. The situation at your former property is deteriorating rapidly. Agent Mitchell is reporting that Marconi's associates are no longer attempting to purchase the house. They're planning to eliminate what they believe are federal witnesses. Ben Torres stepped forward with his legal expertise. Agent Kim, doesn't the FBI have protocols for extracting undercover agents when operations become too dangerous? Mr. Torres' extraction would confirm their suspicions about federal involvement and would likely result in Marconi's entire organization disappearing before we can make arrests. We'd lose months of investigation, and dozens of other families would remain vulnerable to their financial exploitation schemes. Madison looked directly at Agent Kim with an expression of fierce determination. Sarah, I'm going to the house to convince Marconi's people that this is still a legitimate family crisis. If I can make them believe Luke sold the house to spite our family, they might focus on pressuring me instead of threatening the undercover agents. Absolutely not, Frank said firmly. Madison, you're not putting yourself in more danger to fix problems created by federal manipulation. Overtse, but Agent Kim was already shaking her head. Madison, Marconi's associates know you've been providing information about their organization. If you appear at the house now, they'll assume you're working with law enforcement and likely eliminate you as a security threat. I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders as I realized the chain of consequences my house sale had created. Agent Kim, what if I go to the house I'm the original property owner? I could claim I'm trying to reverse the sale because of family pressure. Mr. Patterson, you're not trained for undercover operations involving armed criminals, Agent Kim said. One wrong word or suspicious action could get you killed along with the undercover agents. But as we stood in my destroyed front yard surrounded by federal agents and local police with armed criminals threatening children at my former home, I realized that all the manipulation and deception had led to a moment where someone had to take decisive action. Agent Kim's radio crackled with the most alarming communication yet. Agent Mitchell is reporting shots fired at the perimeter. Marconi's associates are no longer negotiating, they're preparing for assault. The sound of distant gunfire carried across the neighborhood, confirming that the situation at my former house had escalated beyond negotiation. Agent Kim immediately began coordinating tactical response teams, while Madison, my parents and I stood helplessly watching a crisis we'd inadvertently helped create. All units, we have shots fired at the Henderson residence. Agent Kim spoke rapidly into her radio. Subjects are armed and have made explicit threats against minors. Authorization requested for immediate tactical intervention. Frank stepped closer to me, his voice barely above a whisper. Son, those children are in danger because of our family problems. I don't care what federal agents planned or didn't plan. We need to do something to help them. But before I could respond, 2 additional black SUVs arrived, and more federal agents emerged wearing tactical gear. Agent Kim approached the lead tactical officer, a tall man with graying hair who carried himself with military precision. Agent Torres. Agent Kim said to the tactical team leader, "We have undercover agents and civilian actors surrounded by armed subjects who suspect federal involvement. What's your assessment?" Agent Torres reviewed information on a tablet while listening to real-time communications from the house. Agent Kim, our surveillance shows 4 armed subjects with high-powered weapons. They've positioned themselves to prevent escape while maintaining visual contact with what they believe are civilian family members. Madison grabbed my arm, her face pale with understanding. Luke, they're not just threatening the undercover agents. They're planning to eliminate everyone in that house to cover their tracks. If they believe the entire neighborhood is part of a federal investigation, they'll kill witnesses to protect their criminal organization. Dorothy approached Agent Kim with desperate determination. Ma'am, I know we're just civilians, but Frank and I raised 2 children, and we understand how to communicate with desperate people. Maybe we could help convince those criminals that this really is a family crisis instead of a federal operation. Agent Torres shook his head firmly. Ma'am, with respect, we're dealing with professional criminals who've killed people for much less than what they suspect is happening here. Civilian involvement would only increase the danger. But Agent Kim's expression changed as she listened to new intelligence through her earpiece. Agent Torres! We're receiving reports that the armed subjects have discovered federal surveillance equipment hidden in the Henderson house. They now know with certainty that they're dealing with law enforcement. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. The undercover agents and children were no longer just witnesses to be intimidated. They were federal law enforcement officers who could testify about criminal activities, making them targets for elimination. Agent Kim. Ben Torres said his legal training helping him understand the broader implications. If Marconi's associates eliminate federal agents, this becomes a federal murder case with potential death penalty consequences. They have nothing left to lose by escalating violence. Agent Kim nodded grimly. Which means our undercover agents are facing criminals who are prepared to commit murder to avoid prosecution. Standard negotiation tactics are no longer effective. Frank stepped forward, his construction worker's practical mind, cutting through the complexity. Agent Kim, you said the criminals are focused on that house because they think it's connected to Luke's family crisis? What if Luke appeared somewhere else, making it obvious the house sale was just a coincidence? Dad, that's not going to work, Madison interjected. These people have been monitoring our family for weeks. They know Luke's patterns and behavior. If he suddenly appears somewhere unexpected, it will confirm their suspicions about federal involvement. But Agent Kim was studying her tablet with renewed interest. Actually, Madison, there might be a variation of that strategy that could work. Mr. Patterson? What if you were to approach the house openly carrying documentation of your house sale and appearing to be angry about being excluded from family decisions? I felt my heart rate accelerate as I understood what she was suggesting. Agent Kim, you want me to walk into a situation with armed criminals and pretend I'm upset about my family making real estate decisions without consulting me? The key would be authenticity, Agent Kim explained. You wouldn't be pretending to be upset. Based on everything you've experienced today, your anger about being manipulated by your family and by federal agents would be completely genuine. Agent Torres joined the conversation, his tactical expertise adding crucial perspective. Mr. Patterson, if you approach the house carrying legitimate legal documents, and displaying genuine emotional distress, it might convince the armed subjects that this situation is actually a family crisis that coincidentally involved federal surveillance rather than a planned federal operation. Madison looked at me with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Luke, this is incredibly dangerous. These aren't just threats. These people have killed federal informants before, which is exactly why I have to do this." I replied, surprising myself with how clearly I understood what needed to happen. Those children are in danger because of our family situation. I can't live with myself if something happens to them when I might be able to help. Ben Torres stepped closer to me with his legal briefcase. "Luke, I have all the documentation from your house sale 3 days ago. If you carry these documents and approach the house, claiming you want to reverse the sale because of family pressure, it would be completely consistent with everything Marconi's people believe about your family dynamics." Dorothy and Frank exchanged glances, and I saw something pass between them that reminded me of why I'd always respected their marriage. Despite months of manipulation and financial stress, they were still united in their desire to protect family members, even family members they'd never met. "Son," Frank said, placing his hand on my shoulder, "your mother and I will go with you. If this really is supposed to look like a family crisis, then the whole family should be involved in trying to resolve it." Agent Kim shook her head. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, we can't risk multiple civilian lives. If this strategy fails, we need to minimize casualties." "Agent Kim," Dorothy said with quiet determination, "Madison is our daughter. Luke is our son. Those agents and children are somebody else's family members. We've spent 6 months making decisions based on fear and desperation. It's time to make a decision based on doing what's right." Agent Torres received urgent communication through his earpiece, and his expression shifted to alarm. "Agent Kim, the armed subjects have just fired warning shots at the Henderson house. They're demanding that Agent Mitchell and Agent Rodriguez exit the house with their hands visible. This situation is about to become a hostage scenario." The weight of decision settled on all of us as gunfire echoed through the neighborhood again. Federal tactical teams were positioned to intervene, but any assault risked the lives of undercover agents and children. My family's months of manipulation and crisis had led to this moment where innocent people faced death because of circumstances we'd helped create. "I'm going," I said, taking the legal documents from Ben and checking to make sure my cell phone was fully charged. "Agent Kim, if this doesn't work, make sure my family understands that I made this choice to help children who are in danger because of our situation." But as I prepared to approach my former home where armed criminals held federal agents, Agent Kim's radio delivered news that changed everything. "Agent Kim." The voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Agent Mitchell at the Henderson residence. The armed subjects have discovered that David and Carol Henderson aren't actually David and Carol Henderson. But there's something else you need to know. The children we're protecting aren't federal agents. They're my actual children, and Carol Rodriguez is my actual wife. We've been undercover as a family because we actually are a family. The revelation that Agents Mitchell and Rodriguez were actually a married couple with real children transformed the entire operation from a professional law enforcement matter into something profoundly personal. Agent Kim's tactical coordination shifted immediately to prioritize the safety of genuine family members who'd been placed in extreme danger. Agent Torres, Agent Kim commanded the tactical team leader, "We now have confirmed civilians in immediate danger. Authorization granted for full tactical response to protect those children." Frank stepped forward, his parental instincts overriding any concerns about federal procedures or criminal investigations. "Agent Kim, those are real children facing real danger because of our family problems. We need to act now." I grabbed the legal documents Ben had prepared and started walking toward my truck, but Agent Kim intercepted me. "Mr. Patterson, the tactical situation has changed. We're no longer attempting to maintain the illusion of a family crisis. We're conducting a federal rescue operation. Madison followed me to the truck, her face etched with determination and guilt. Luke, I'm coming with you. Those children are in danger because I allowed federal agents to manipulate our family. I need to help fix this. No, Madison, Dorothy said firmly, stepping between Madison and the truck. You've been through enough manipulation and danger. Luke can handle this with federal support. But as we debated family involvement in the tactical response, Agent Kim received communication that made all our planning irrelevant. All units subjects at the Henderson residence are withdrawing. Repeat armed subjects are leaving the property and appear to be retreating. Agent Torres confirmed the intelligence through his tactical channels. Agent Kim, our perimeter teams report 4 vehicles leaving the Henderson property at high speed. Subjects appear to be abandoning their position. Why would they withdraw suddenly? Ben Torres asked his legal mind, searching for explanations that made strategic sense. Agent Kim listened to additional communications before responding. Agent Mitchell reports that the armed subjects received radio communication that apparently convinced them to retreat immediately. We're trying to intercept those communications to understand what changed their tactical assessment. Frank, Dorothy, Madison, and I stood together in my destroyed front yard, watching federal agents coordinate a complex law enforcement response that had suddenly shifted from rescue operation to pursuit of fleeing criminals. Agent Kim, I said, does this mean the children are safe? Agent Mitchell confirms that his family is secure and unharmed, Agent Kim replied. However, we still don't understand why Marconi's associates withdrew so abruptly. Professional criminals don't typically abandon operations unless they've received information that fundamentally changes their risk assessment. Ben Torres was studying documents on his tablet when his expression shifted to understanding. Agent Kim, I think I know what happened. I've been monitoring federal court filings, and there was a major arrest warrant issued for Tony Marconi 30 minutes ago. If his organization received notification that Marconi had been arrested, they would retreat immediately to avoid being connected to his criminal activities. Agent Kim confirmed Ben's assessment through her communications channels. Mr. Torres is correct. Federal agents arrested Tony Marconi at his office downtown based on evidence gathered through this investigation. His criminal organization is now in full retreat mode, abandoning all ongoing operations to avoid prosecution. Madison sank down onto my front steps, exhaustion and relief washing over her face. So it's really over. The criminal organization that recruited me, the threats against our family, the manipulation of our relationships, all of it is finished. Madison, Agent Kim said, your cooperation with federal law enforcement over the past months has helped dismantle a criminal network that was systematically destroying families across multiple states. Tony Marconi and his associates will face federal charges, including money laundering, extortion fraud, and now threatening federal agents and their children. Frank approached Agent Kim with a question that had been weighing on all of us. Ma'am, what happens to our family now? We've spent our retirement savings, damaged our relationships with Luke, and committed crimes based on manipulation we didn't understand. Agent Kim opened her tablet and reviewed financial documentation. Mr. Patterson federal asset forfeiture from Marconi's criminal organization will total over $2 million. These funds will be distributed to victim families, including full restitution for your retirement savings, Luke's property damage, and compensation for the emotional trauma your family experienced. Dorothy looked up from the broken porch furniture, tears of relief replacing the desperate tears she'd cried earlier. Agent Kim, does that mean Frank and I won't lose our house? Can we rebuild our retirement security? Mrs. Patterson, not only will your financial losses be restored, but you'll receive additional compensation recognizing that your family's suffering was instrumental in exposing criminals who would have continued destroying other families indefinitely. Ben Torres stepped forward with his legal expertise. Agent Kim, what about the legal consequences for the property destruction that occurred here today? Frank and Dorothy Patterson technically committed vandalism based on circumstances they didn't fully understand. Agent Kim considered the legal complexities involved. Mr. Torres, given that Frank and Dorothy Patterson were victims of an elaborate criminal manipulation scheme, and given their cooperation with the federal investigation, once they understood the true circumstances, no charges will be filed related to property damage. Additionally, Luke's house sale will be processed normally with full proceeds plus federal compensation for his cooperation. I looked around at my family, seeing them clearly for the first time in months. Frank and Dorothy had aged years in the past 6 months, but the desperation and fear were already fading from their faces. Madison appeared younger somehow, as if the weight of deception and manipulation had been lifted from her shoulders. Agent Kim Saki, I said, there's something I need to understand. How much of what my family experienced was real and how much was manufactured by federal agents? Agent Kim's expression became more personal as she considered how to answer honestly. Mr. Patterson, your parents' love for Madison was real. Their willingness to sacrifice everything to protect their daughter was genuine. Your anger and frustration with enabling Madison's destructive behavior was justified. The pain your family experienced was authentic, even though the circumstances creating that pain were artificially constructed. Madison stood up and approached me with nervous determination. Luke, I know I can't undo the months of lies and manipulation, even if some of it was directed by federal agents. I know our relationship may never be the same. But I need you to know that watching Mom and Dad destroy themselves financially to protect me was the most horrible experience of my life. I never want to be the cause of family pain like that again. Frank stood up and put his arms around both Madison and me. Kids, we're a family. We've been through something that most families never experience. We've learned things about ourselves and each other that we never wanted to know. But we're still a family, and we'll figure out how to heal together. Dorothy joined our family embrace, her voice steady despite her tears. Luke, Madison, we've all made mistakes. We've all been manipulated. But we've also seen how much we love each other and how far we're willing to go to protect family. That's worth building on. Agent Kim approached our family group with a final official communication. The FBI will provide family counseling services to help you process the trauma of this investigation. Additionally, we'll need your continued cooperation as witnesses in the federal prosecution of Marconi's organization. Your testimony will help ensure that other families don't experience what you've been through. Ben Torres gathered his legal documents while addressing practical concerns. Luke, Agent Kim, what's the timeline for resolving the financial compensation and property matters? Mr. Torres, Agent Kim replied, federal asset forfeiture proceedings typically take 60 to 90 days. However, given the unusual circumstances of this case and the cooperation provided by the Patterson family, we can expedite compensation within 30 days. As federal agents began departing and local police completed their documentation, I stood in my front yard surrounded by broken glass and damaged property, but also surrounded by family members who were finally free from months of manipulation and fear. Agent Mitchell approached our family group carrying his young daughter while holding his son's hand. His wife Carol walked beside him, and seeing them as an actual family rather than undercover agents made their risk and sacrifice feel much more personal. Mr. Patterson. Agent Mitchell said, I wanted to thank you and your family personally. Your willingness to enter a dangerous situation to protect my children means everything to me as a father. Your family's courage helped us complete an investigation that will protect countless other families. I shook Agent Mitchell's hand, looking into the faces of the children who'd been in danger because of our family's crisis. Agent Mitchell, thank you for putting your own family at risk to help families like mine. I hope your children understand someday that their father's work makes the world safer for other children. Carol Rodriguez smiled and addressed Madison directly. Madison, your courage in working undercover for months to expose criminal activity probably saved my children's lives today. Thank you for risking your own safety to protect families you'd never met." As the federal agents departed and the neighborhood began returning to normal, Frank, Dorothy, Madison, and I stood together in front of my damaged house, processing everything that had happened. "Luke," Dorothy said, looking at the broken windows and scattered debris, "we'll help you clean this up and repair everything we destroyed. I know that doesn't fix the trust we damaged, but it's where we can start." "Mom," I replied, "the house can be repaired easily. Rebuilding our family relationships will take more time and work, but I think we're all committed to making that happen." Madison looked around at the destruction, and then at our family. "You know what I learned from all this? Real families don't manipulate each other to get what they want. Real families communicate honestly, even when the truth is difficult. I want us to be a real family from now on." Frank nodded his construction worker's practical wisdom, cutting through emotional complexity. "Kids, we've torn down some things that needed to be torn down. The lies, the manipulation, the fear that kept us from being honest with each other. Now we get to rebuild something stronger than what we had before." 6 months later, I hosted Christmas dinner in my new house purchased with proceeds from my original house sale, plus federal compensation for my cooperation in the Marconi investigation. The dining room table seated 8 people comfortably, and every seat was filled. Frank and Dorothy had recovered their financial security and looked healthier than they had in years. They'd used part of their federal compensation to take the European vacation they dreamed about for decades. Madison had completed her testimony in the federal case and started working for a nonprofit organization that helps families recognize and escape financial manipulation schemes. Ben Torres joined us for dinner along with his wife Maria, having become genuine friends beyond our professional relationship. Agent Mitchell and Carol Rodriguez attended with their children, creating friendships that extended far beyond their original undercover assignment. Madison raised her wine glass for a toast. "I want to thank everyone here for showing me what real family relationships look like. You've all taught me that love means being honest even when honesty is painful, and supporting each other even when support requires sacrifice." Frank stood up with his own glass. "I've learned that protecting family sometimes means refusing to enable destructive behavior while maintaining hope for healing. Luke showed me that saying no to someone you love can be the most loving thing you do." Dorothy added her own thoughts. "I've learned that real strength comes not from avoiding problems, but from facing them honestly with the people who love you. This family is stronger now because we've learned to communicate instead of manipulate." I looked around the table at the faces of people who'd become important to my life through crisis and recovery. "I've learned that true security comes not from isolating yourself to protect your assets, but from building relationships with people who will support you through difficult times. Family isn't just about blood relatives. It's about people who choose to stand by you when life becomes complicated." Agent Mitchell's young daughter, who'd been quietly listening to the adult conversation, spoke up with the wisdom that sometimes comes from children who've experienced serious situations. "I think families are like houses. Sometimes they get damaged by storms or bad people, but if the foundation is strong, you can rebuild them even better than before." Carol Rodriguez smiled at her daughter's observation. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. The Patterson family had a strong foundation of love, even when everything else got damaged. That's why they could rebuild their relationships." As dinner concluded and our guests prepared to leave, Madison pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Luke, I know our relationship will never be the same as it was before all this happened. I violated your trust in ways that can't be completely erased. But I want you to know that having a brother who loves me enough to say no when I'm being destructive is one of the greatest gifts of my life." Madison. I replied, "Loving someone enough to refuse enabling their destructive behavior is something I learned from watching our parents' marriage. They've always been honest with each other, even when honesty was difficult. I want that kind of relationship with you." Frank and Dorothy were the last to leave, and as they prepared to drive home to their fully restored house, Dorothy hugged me tightly. "Luke, I'm proud of the man you've become. You showed courage and integrity when your family needed leadership, and you forgave us when we made terrible mistakes. That's the kind of person I raised you to be. And I'm grateful you remembered those values when we forgot them." Frank shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who'd rebuilt his relationship with his son. "Son, you've taught me that real strength sometimes looks like standing alone against people you love, when standing together would mean enabling destruction. I'm proud to be your father." As I cleaned up after the dinner party, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from months of family crisis federal investigation and ultimately healing and growth. The most important realization was that authentic relationships require the courage to be honest even when honesty creates conflict. Enabling destructive behavior in the name of family loyalty actually destroys families by preventing people from facing consequences that could motivate change. True love sometimes means refusing to rescue people from problems they need to solve themselves. However, refusing to enable destruction doesn't mean abandoning people during crisis. It means maintaining boundaries while offering support for positive change. Madison had needed consequences for her choices, but she'd also needed family members who continued believing in her capacity for redemption. The investigation had also taught me that professional help is essential when family problems involve criminal activity addiction or psychological manipulation. Families don't have the expertise to handle every crisis independently, and seeking appropriate help isn't a sign of weakness but of wisdom. Perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that community support makes family healing possible. The relationships we'd built with Agent Mitchell's family, Ben Torres and his wife and other people who'd become important to us, provided perspectives and support that our family couldn't generate internally. True security comes not from accumulating assets to protect yourself from others, but from building relationships with people who will support you during difficult times. The house I'd fought so hard to protect had become less important than the relationships I'd been willing to sacrifice to keep it. Have you ever faced a situation where protecting someone you love required saying no to their requests for help? How do you balance family loyalty with personal boundaries when people you care about make destructive choices? I'd love to hear about your experiences with family crisis and healing in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my family story of manipulation crisis and ultimately redemption. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about family relationships and personal growth, and share it with someone who might benefit from understanding how families can heal from serious damage while maintaining their love for each other. Remember that every family faces crisis at some point, but crisis can become an opportunity for growth and stronger relationships if family members choose honesty, seek appropriate help, and maintain hope for healing while refusing to enable destructive behavior. I hope your family relationships are filled with honest communication, genuine support, and the kind of love that helps everyone become the best version of themselves.